and I'll let Doug take over with the intro of overall Strabo ecosystem.
Let's see if this works. Can everybody hear me and see something that looks like a 5-minute intro to the Strabo Spot ecosystem?
Sure can.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming today. This is really exciting, getting into the micro side, and this is, I guess, the development you're seeing here has been really concentrated over the last year, even though it began well before that. Strabo Spot has a lot of moving parts to it at this point, and I just want to kind of give an introduction on where we are and some of the ideas behind it. So we came up with this idea of a spot, and a spot is basically any location that has a radius of interest or importance, or a buffer of interest or importance. And these can be at all different scales. So this one is on a 50 to 100 meter scale. These are on meter scale, sub-meter scale, and grain scale. So basically what we do is we have a data system for this that is hierarchical and keeps track of all the different scales and all the relationships. We're using not a relational database, but a graph database representation, which is really very well tuned to this. And if you want more details on it, there was a Geosphere paper published a year and a half ago. I hope there's a link to that somewhere in the stuff that explains this in more detail. But anyway, the idea here is that you can go into the field carrying a mobile device that has GPS, et cetera, and you're able to document everything in the field. So collect samples, oriented samples, get billets from those, collect samples, get thin sections, and then get images. So the idea here is that the system really does not have a scale. When you look at a GIS, usually GISs have intended scale of use. Really with Strabo Spot, there is no intended scale of use. You can go across whatever you want to do that. So the lower part of this just shows that everything is fairly uniform and navigable from the iPad to micro imagery. Oops. So that was sort of the field part of it. I'll show a little bit more of that and some of the micro part that we're going to get into. Strabo Spot has a few other things going on with it as well that we're working with communities on. And this is, for example, what the sedimentology component of Strabo is looking like now. Basically, you can collect measured sections with all the flexibility of Strabo, with all the flexibility of using images, anything you want, and put that together. This is, if you've been using Strabo, the app now, you know that this is one of the things that you can turn on with it. When we're working in Strabo, and one thing that a lot of people here have done very importantly is that Strabo Spot is based on a lexicon. And this is, I think, unusual for a lot of data science efforts in that we did not define the lexicon. We basically went out to the community to have all of this checked and tried to get community consensus on what to use. You can never get to 100%, but what we put together is this lexicon that represents what the majority, 80% or more of people would use. And we've done this now in sedimentation, structural geology, working in micro, we'll be working in geomorphology soon, economic geology, and petrology we've already worked in as well. The idea is with this standardized vocabulary and with collecting the data in the field, you could then go in and do searches that will be pretty detailed on the data. So this is at the StraboSpot.org site search engine. And for example, this is showing searching for photographs. But again, there's a lot more to this. And once you have this standard vocabulary in, you can make very, very rich searches for people to do and to expand out with. There's another component to this that we've been working on, Alan Glazner and I, called Strabo Tools. And this is sort of the first cut, very repeatable way of doing things like taking a picture of a rock, looking at its color index. This is a first shot at determining the mode of the rock based on color, and then putting some idea of preferred orientation or fabrics in. This right now is built as a standalone app, but can be brought into, or we're hoping to bring it into, the actual Strabo Spot app itself sometime soon. So when we look at this ecosystem I just put together, we have the field part, and the field part will be collecting data, taking strikes and dips, taking photographs, even using Strabo Tools if you wanted to. What we're getting today is the Strabo Micro part. And this is really powerful, and it basically says you can look at a rock in the field and then see individual grain analyses, for example, if you wanted at the same time. One of the other things that we're working on is getting experimental data put in. And I think these guys can probably address that a little further, but experimental rock deformation into the system, working with a bunch of people in the US and abroad. And this is an effort that we're going through with the European Plate Observing System as well. And then all of this is tied together at the main StraboSpot.org website. That's where you can do your data management, set up your account, keep files, move files around, and different projects. So you have your total data management here, including keeping your data private for a while. So basically the Strabo Spot ecosystem at this point is moving pretty much across all scales of observation and data collection, and allowing people to work on things themselves until they're happy with it, and then they can release it if they want. And that should be it.
Okay, thank you, Doug. I'm gonna immediately continue on with talking about Strabo Micro. Give me just a second. Okay, can everybody see a CL image of an overgrowth? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, picking up on Strabo Micro and talking about sort of what our vision for this is and where we are and where we're hoping to go. First, I'd like to kind of mention the Strabo Micro team. So these are people who on some level you may be interacting with over the coming weeks and months about this subject. So we have Julie Newman and Noah Phillips at Texas A&M, Basil, Nick, Alex, and myself at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Vasilis Chasaris was also very active in this process, particularly in the early stages, now at the University of Sydney. And also, of course, Jason Ash is our developer, the person who's actually responsible for implementing the system you're about to see today. So kind of our vision of Strabo Micro is that we're trying to put together effectively a multi-platform system for storing, sharing, and contextualizing microstructural data. I think that's something that is really quite unique about Strabo in my experience. There's lots of places out there these days that will store and share your data. I mean, you've probably all seen Open Science Foundation, any number of other university repositories will do this. But in my opinion, what Strabo does differently is it provides sort of the fundamental context that go along with that data that allow other people to use them and interpret them in a useful way. Ultimately, this is something that's going to be fully integrated with the rest of the Strabo Spot ecosystem, like Doug mentioned. And like all Strabo Spot efforts, it's 100% open access. All you need to access this is an internet connection and an email address to make a Strabo account. And it is effectively community designed in a very real way. Now, that being said, that's the ultimate sort of goal of Strabo Micro, but we're not there yet. Of course, this is a beta test. And where we are now, and I hit on this on a previous email, is that we effectively have now a very sleek, very usable and useful hierarchical image management system effectively. So this lets you do things like import microstructural images, give them some context, scale, orientation, all those things, along with instrument and image metadata, but also some very basic functionality in terms of quantitative and qualitative data entry. For any of you who are involved in kind of the vocabulary building effort of this, you'll know that this is nowhere near the scope of where we're ultimately trying to go. But we sort of made a decision early on here that the image management portion of this is so fundamental to what we all do as microstructure people, that we have to be sure we have that absolutely nailed down before we move forward with trying to do more complicated things with deformation microstructures or anything else. So that's effectively what we're asking you to test today. An important thing to note about this is that currently this is all local. So when you use this application, everything is locally stored on your device. It's not currently pushing anything to the Strabo Spot server. That's something that's going to come down the line a bit. Where we're going, of course. So we currently in the Strabo Micro app, you're able to be looking at microstructural imagery and make a connection to the field, to field context, and be able to get that connection instantaneously. Eventually, as Doug mentioned, we're going to be going to the point where you can also see microstructural data on the mobile application in the field. That's somewhere we're going to be heading. And that's part and parcel effectively of getting centralized storage going on the Strabo Spot server, where we'll start actually pushing our microstructural data and images to the server to be stored where other people will be able to find them. And also, of course, the thing that most of you are probably the most interested in is implementation of the more detailed microstructural observations you might want to make. You can see some of the vocabulary on the left of the screen. I can tell you this is a very, very tiny portion of a very, very large vocabulary that many of you have helped to build. And we're actually, I kid you not, starting on that tomorrow. When this workshop is over tomorrow, we're going to start talking about how to move into that field and start working with that as we get feedback from all of you about the current image management system. And I just want to mention that vocabulary is being developed in concert with the EPOS effort, so that we're sure that anything we do here is going to be compatible with similar efforts going on in Europe today. And finally, what we really need from you is basically just your honest and open input about how we're doing, what the system is like for you, and how you might like it to be different. There really is sort of no Strabo at all without that feedback. It is a community-led system. We are asking you to hopefully make that feedback kind of timely. That doesn't mean you have to give us a big report in the next 3 days, but we would like to hopefully hear from you sometime over the course of the next 1 or 2 months, so that we can start making any changes that you might suggest. We'll also ask you to recognize at this point that this really is a beta. There's a reasonably high probability that in playing around with this, it might crash. And when it does, we want to hear about that. We went through a lot of effort leading up to this to find those things that make the system crash ourselves, and fix those as fast as we could. We'll fix them similarly quickly if you find them, but do please approach this with kind of an open mind that this is a testing version, and that's sort of its purpose. Okay, so that is all I had for that. I think in the interest of time at this point, maybe we'll save questions toward the end, if that's okay with everybody. I mean, the chat is always open. Feel free to ask questions there. But if you have a question that you'd like to ask out loud for the group, let's save those for the end. And I will turn it over to, I think, Nick first, who's going to provide some demos of some data he's been working with.
Yep. All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I want to give you a brief demonstration of kind of the getting started in Strabo Micro, and then also just show you a few things about the way that we organize photomicrographs and some of the files that we can associate with them. So when you first open Strabo Micro, you're going to get a screen like this. You need a Strabo account. And if you don't have one, you can click on this link. It'll take you to create a Strabo account, which is just an email and a password. And it'll bring you right into the user interface. So it says at the top that I'm logged into my Strabo account. And to start a project, there are a couple options, and you can either create a new project or open a local project. So a project that's already been worked on and is all packaged in a file already on your desktop or on your computer. And then finally, this open remote project, that's to start a Strabo Micro project that is linked up with an existing Strabo field project. So I'm going to go ahead and show you that. When you click on that, it will just open up a window that has all of your Strabo Spot projects that are on strabospot.org in your account. So here I'll choose this one, and you can choose a data set that contains samples. So we'll go to my 2018 field season. And what it brings you is a list of all your samples. And it's listed alphabetically, but if I'm searching for sample 226, I can just type that and it'll bring it up. And so as you're starting this project and you link it up, you're going to just be asked right away to load a reference micrograph. And this is where I'll stop for now, because the next demonstration is going to show you exactly how to load those photomicrographs. That's just a quick demonstration to show you how you link a project up with something on strabospot.org. You can also just start a brand new project that has nothing to do with an existing StraboSpot data set. You'll just be asked to create a project name and some optional data, and it'll bring you through a wizard to do that. So I have prepared a local project. Here it is. I'll just open that up. And this is a project that I've connected with the same data set that I had just opened up. And it takes a little while to open up because these are pretty big image files. So here we go. This is the user interface. On the left, you have all of the micrographs that you've loaded, and they're hierarchically arranged. So you have kind of base maps, and we call those reference micrographs. These are full thin section images, or images that capture all of the space that that more data will be added onto. And then associated micrographs like this EBSD IPFZ image. And you can see exactly where these images have been placed. And of course, you can also, under view, remove those images from the base maps. So it's hierarchically arranged here. In the center is the kind of the current image that you have selected. So you can click around on the sidebar to go to different images. And then on the right is spot data. So right now, the spot that I have selected is the photomicrograph itself. And so if I go to sample metadata, you can see that it's pulled down some data from strabospot.org. You can also add point lines and polygons. So I've added the outline of a fold within this thin section. And that's quite simple. So if I want to add a point spot, I just click that and then click anywhere on my thin section. And if you are, well, here, I'll just, to not confuse things. So you can name the spot, you can add notes, and that will create a new spot for which you can add information on the right. So I want to highlight just 3 things. The first is that this sample bar is organized currently just by the order in which I imported them, but we often want to group thin sections. So here I have thin sections that some are chert mylonites, but other ones are granitic rocks, completely different part of my field area. They're in the same project, but I want to kind of separate them. So you can do something called group. So this tab, you can actually group thin sections and images by whatever flexible organization you want. So here are all the chert mylonites that I have. And here I've, just as an example, I was starting to interpret the granitic microstructures. And so I grouped them into different fabric groupings. So that's groups, and Noah next will show you a different way that he chose to use groups to organize his data. The second thing I want to show you is that you can actually, if your project is linked up with a StraboSpot project, you can actually view that sample at strabospot.org just by clicking that link. And it will take you to the data set. So the zoomed outness is because I have data set over a very large area, and the computer is a bit slow right now, but you can zoom in to whatever sample you have selected and actually view that sample in its field context. And not just this where it is, but here on the right is all the data that you collected in the field about that sample. And the final thing that I want to show is that you can associate any type of file with a micrograph. So if you go down here to associated files, you can see here that I have associated a quartz CPO of recrystallized grains. And to open it, I just click it and it opens it in your computer's image viewer. And so you can just view that. Another example of something that you might immediately want to do with this is an IPFZ image. So we can edit the files, and to add a new file, I just want to go to my desktop and pull that IPFZ color key, just so that it's associated, just say it's an image. And there it is. So then that file is also associated with this image. So next, Noah is going to give a presentation, and I don't know, Noah, do you want to do the presentation, or do you want me to play the pre-recorded one since you're in Texas and might lose power?
Either or is fine. Go ahead and play the video, and then I can show some brief things afterwards.
Okay, sounds good. So just 1 second while I open that up. All right, can people see that?
Hi,
Yes,
what I'd like to show you today is how to add a new sample into the Strabo Micro system. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new sample in this top left-hand corner of the screen. When we add a new sample, it asks us for a bunch of information about the sample itself. So I'm going to fill that in now. Okay, so now that we've put in that information, we're going to load our reference micrograph. The reference micrograph is used as a base map on which all other observations are put. When we upload a reference micrograph, we can load metadata in a couple different ways. One, we can simply load metadata from a previous spot that we've put in. Or we can look up an instrument from the instrument database, and that'll input all the metadata about that instrument. So for this example, I'm going to load the metadata from a previous image. And I'm going to modify it for the current image. So in this case, the image type doesn't have the gypsum plate in, it's a plain polarized light image. Now all the metadata has been automatically filled based on the spot that I loaded it. Now we're going to give this a name. So now it's going to load the reference micrograph into the system. And what we'll have to do is set the scale. So in this case, it's an unoriented thin section. You can also, if it's an oriented thin section, you can put in the trend and plunge of each surface, or use a fabric reference frame where you input the foliation and lineation and say what orientation you're looking at the sample from. So we'll go unoriented for this thin section. Then it asks us to set the scale. In this case, the thin section is a standard thin section, so I know it's 27 millimeters across. And so I can just draw a line using the line tool down here and input 27 millimeters. Our reference micrograph is now in the system. We can see it on the left-hand side here as a new sample. So what I'm going to do now is add a couple of associated micrographs. So we click on the plus button next to the micrograph that we want to add an associated micrograph to. And then we load the image that we want to add. So in this case, I'm going to load an EBSD phase map. Now we put in the same instrument metadata. So in this case, I'm going to load it from an instrument that's in the instrument database. So I'm going to use this Hitachi SEM from McGill University, which is where I collected this image from. And then I still need to input the data type. So this is an electron backscatter diffraction image, and we're looking at a phase map. Now, the information about the instrument and the detectors is already filled in because I loaded it from the database. And now I can put in information about the settings that I used for collecting the data. Now there's a couple ways that I can locate my micrograph onto my reference micrograph. And in this case, we're going to locate it as a scaled rectangle. And I'm going to stretch and drag it to its correct position because this image doesn't have a scale bar. So this pops up a modal where we can stretch and drag the new image using the four corners or rotate it using this red dot on the side. And so now I'm going to move this micrograph into its correct location on the reference micrograph. Now, once you have that micrograph in the correct location, you can click Finish. That saves the new image on top of the reference micrograph. So now we can see our phase map clearly located on our reference micrograph. And I'm going to add one more just as an example. All right, so now we have two images, each located on top of a previous image. And so you can really see how this the hierarchical setup images within Strabo Micro. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our reference micrograph and input some data about it. And we do that using the tabs on the side. So currently we can add mineralogy data, grain info data, so that's characterizing the size and the shape of the grains, and fabric info. So I'm just going to go through quickly and input data for each of those. I hope this has been helpful in getting you acquainted with Strabo Micro.
Okay, thank you, Noah, for doing that. As you guys probably heard, Texas is in a bit of a situation weather-wise right now, and the power is unreliable. So Noah was asked to prepare a video for this rather than try to do it live. I think based on the sort of length of what Alex has to talk about, we could take a few questions quickly now if people wanted to ask them, or we could wait until the end. So I'll give it a minute if somebody wants to. If you want to ask a question to the group, please just unmute yourself. You should be able to do that and go ahead and ask.
And Randy, I'll also just quickly show the instrument database really
Oh,
quick.
yeah, please go ahead. That would be good.
Okay, so I think you guys saw that what you can do is, can everybody see the Strabo Spot homepage right now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what you could see when I was uploading individual images and kind of auto-populating some of the metadata is one way to do that is by loading instrument metadata from what's known as the instrument repository. So basically, I think what's going to happen is you're going to email Jason, and he's going to give you access for your institution to add new instruments. So we'll send out information about how exactly to do that. But once you've been approved to add instruments, you're going to go to your account on Strabo Spot and click on My Instruments. And that's going to load up the instrument catalog. And so I've put in some instruments for Texas A&M University and McGill University. And to add an instrument, all you do is you click on this little plus symbol. And that's going to take you to a place where you can put in information about the type of instrument it is, give it a name and where it's located. And depending on the type of instrument you choose, you can put in things about the detectors that are used and the software that you use for that instrument to collect images. And then once you're done putting that in, you click save, and then that will get auto-populated anytime you load in an image using that instrument. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. And I think Noah mentioned in his video it's not required. I mean, you can always enter instruments on the fly in the application, but we've found so far that the database is actually a really handy and useful way to do it, and it kind of leverages some institutional work in a way, I guess you might call it. Like if somebody in your institution has already defined something, then that's less work that other people have to do in the future. Okay, I think if there are no immediate questions, then Alex is going to talk a little bit about just kind of the logistics of how we're going to do this testing. And then, like I said, the Strabo team will hang around for questions. But after that, I think that's we're all wrapped up. So go ahead, Alex.
Great. Everybody can see a screen PowerPoint presentation.
Yep.
All right. So if you haven't already installed Strabo Micro, to do it, you can just go to the Strabo website /micro, or go to strabospot.org and click on software, and there will be a link for Micro there as well. Installation should be fairly straightforward. If you have any sort of questions or want to report bugs or give us suggestions, this is what Randy talked about with the, providing beta feedback. We have two options. If it's a quick question or something that should be fairly straightforward, you can contact Randy directly. Otherwise, our preferred mode of communication will be this Google Doc that I've linked here. The Google Doc should help expedite response time because the whole Strabo Micro team will be participating. Also, nothing will get lost in email, and we'll develop or start to build kind of a community-driven reference document. So here's what that Google Sheet looks like. There are two tabs, one for technical questions and then one for reporting bugs or suggestions. And all we need you to do is just fill out your date, name, contact, and whatever your issue is, and then the staff will take care of everything else. Lastly, please share this, but keep it within your lab group. Don't distribute it beyond your lab group while we're still in the testing phase. But having said that, the more users within your lab groups that can work with it, the better off we are. And then lastly, this is a beta version, keep that in mind. So we can't yet guarantee your projects or the viability of your data yet. So keep that in mind when you're putting in images and doing a lot of work. Just be comfortable losing whatever you put in. Having said that, we haven't had issues and we don't anticipate that, but keep it in mind. And I think that's all I have. So at this point, we can take questions.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And I'll just, this is probably obvious, but I'll just add because it's a scary eventuality. Like you'll never lose any data using this system. Your project may cease to function within Strabo Micro, but it's not like the data is going to like have disappeared from your hard drive or something. Like everything that Strabo Micro uses, it stores in kind of a local compressed zip file. So that zip file may stop working as we upgrade and go through versions. We're going to try to make sure that doesn't happen, but it could happen. But that isn't something that actually threatens the existence of the data on your computer. I just wanted to be extra clear about that. Doug.
I'll just add to that. I still work on the project that I made 6 years ago in the Strabo Field app, and it still functions normally.
Yeah, we're going to make every effort to make sure that everything stays compatible. It's just at this point, we want to be clear we can't guarantee that right now.
Hey, this is Alan Glazner. I have a logistics question. I'm about to do a bunch of old-fashioned petrography for working with a co-author, and I was just going to take photomicrographs the usual way and so on. And I'm wondering what the investment is in startup to get this together. So, I'd love to be able to take a scan of the thin section and then place the more detailed photomicrographs on top of that. But there's a lot of entry-level stuff that I'm not even going to want to bother with. Can I just kind of skip that and get right into taking the images and placing them where I want them?
It depends what you mean by the entry level stuff. Most of the things you saw the demonstrations interacting with aren't strictly required in terms of being filled out. That's always been part of the Strabo ethos, is we don't try to make you input anything more than what's absolutely necessary.
Right.
for the
It's there if you want it, but you can just leave a lot of those fields blank.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right,
and that's the case. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what can be skipped and what can't, but I can tell you pretty safely most of it can be skipped.
Yeah, it sounds like a great way to do this. So this timing is perfect.
Good.
I'll give it a try. Yeah.
Yeah, we'd be happy to hear from you.
Stacia has her hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, my camera is not working at the moment, but I assume it's pretty easy to annotate the images that you've added in there. So if you wanted to label phases or draw in kind of emphasizing the SC fabric, I assume that's pretty easy to do. And then you could export those images to drop them into publications and that sort of thing.
Annotation right now is limited to what you can do with the kind of spot primitives, which would be a point line and a polygon. I think it would be pretty reasonable to add a text functionality to that. I think certainly. So if that's something if that's a thing people are interested in, we can probably do that. I also think the idea of exporting to an image, preserving those annotations is a really good idea. It's not doing that at just this second. But my guess, and Jason can correct me on this, my guess is that that one in particular would probably be pretty straightforward to do.
Yeah, it would take a bit of work, but we could definitely do that.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
thanks.
Stacey, if that's something you're interested in, motivated by, it's sufficiently obvious and high level that I'm thinking like, yeah, we should do that. But please do put that in the Google sheet so that we don't lose track of that.
Yeah, to me, it'd be nice if you can do as much as you want or as much as possible within Strabo Micro and not have to then take your images also into Illustrator to add those sorts of things and have it all in one place and saved in one place.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that makes a lot of sense.
But it looks awesome. You guys have done a really nice job, or you all have done a nice job.
So Alan Noah added some stuff to the chat, says basically instrument and image type are required and a name for the image is needed. Everything else is optional. So that would be a situation where you'd basically have to do it once. You'd say this was my petrographic microscope, and then every one you did after that, you could just say it was the same as the previous.
Yeah, it sounds like this will solve the age-old problem of how you keep track of all the photos you take.
That's one of the reasons we decided to release it in the current state. Not only is it useful to get feedback now, it struck us kind of immediately as a tool that was useful to have now.
Yep.
Alex, can you add the link to the Google Doc to the chat? Stacia was asking for it.
1 sec.
And as I said, guys, like the Strabo team will stay around for as long as you want to answer questions, but at this point, you certainly don't need to feel obligated to keep hanging out with us. We're happy to keep hanging out with you, but you're also free to head out if you need to.
Randy, are you looking for us to also be associating raw data files too, or are you really just thinking about the images at this point and kind of piggybacking off of what Zach was talking about in the chat?
I think there's a big vision for Strabo Micro to include raw data files. Now, in terms of what we're looking for from you guys now, I don't think we want to be prescriptive. I would say we just want you to try to use it within your whatever your natural workflow is, right? And just see what comes out of that. If that would involve uploading a big EBSD data file, then I think that's great. But I would say you can do whatever sort of feels natural to you on it.
Okay.
So I had a bunch of thoughts and questions. I don't know if this is a good time to ask them, maybe meet with a smaller group. And some of them follows from my email about nomenclature. I don't know how that's going to be implemented. So I have a lot of questions and thoughts about it. I also just tried to pull the app up a few days ago and immediately found something. I said, oh, is that a bug or am I using it wrong? So maybe go step through some simple stuff at some point. So
yeah, I think things that are sufficiently specific about like, is this a bug in the app? I think you and I could definitely set up a Zoom meeting and talk about that. And okay. Nomenclature, I'm happy to talk about at any point. It's a bit of a bear, which I think a lot of the people in this room now know. I mean, looking around, a lot of people here have been involved in helping us define vocabulary, and it's very tricky, and we're always open to more suggestions about how to do that better.
You know, I just come up with some real basic questions. For example, I can see in the app where you can measure grain size and put in histograms. Me, I might just like to say, oh, well, this mineral is a porphyroblast and this is, you know, in the matrix. And immediately I tried to define the minerals that way, and I found out I don't see a way to do that. And then I realized, and of course, if I was igneous petrologist, I might want to do exactly the same thing, but given the wisdom behind geologic nomenclature, I realized, well, it would be a different name, a phenocryst and not a porphyroblast. And so, you know, got all these terms, and you might just want to define them immediately as you put in the mineralogy. And so, yeah, I don't know how this is organized. You probably don't want to discuss all this now, but moving forward, I'm just curious how that's going to work.
Sure, I think your point about it's a porphyroblast, that's actually a great point. You know, that stuff is in the vocabulary, but the place you were talking about where it is a natural place to deal with it also. Overlapping terminology is always a problem. In the past, the way we've kind of dealt with that is to say, like, you can call it a porphyroblast, you can call it a phenocryst, like, you know, we kind of let people define what to do. I mean, the advantage of that is I'm trying to think of an analogy of things that are sort of the same. Like, you know, in my world of structure, somebody might call something like a deformation band in the sedimentary sense of the word, or a cataclastic shear band, right? I don't think those are both in the vocabulary, but if they were, for example, the advantage is the end use case, right? Which is like, if you're a practitioner searching for data, then you can search for deformation bands and cataclastic shear bands, right? So it's, on some level, it's okay to have overlapping terminologies as long as the search functionality is sufficiently capable of dealing with both. But that's just sort of my take on it. Doug might have something else to add about that, because he's spent more time thinking about these kinds of things.
What we're hoping to do is that at some point there are going to be complementary terms, and through some sort of looking at vocabulary through a computer science lens, start working on ontologies and figure out equivalencies, at least on some things.
But on a real simple level, so I mean, is the thinking here to have like some sort of vocabulary? So if I want to type in a mineral, I know it's a porphyroblast. Do I sort of choose a category porphyroblasts? If so, I don't think that's the way it's set up now. Or do I just type in like, oh, garnet porphyroblast, and just define it that way? I mean, I just sort of get an idea of what the thinking is, and how best to provide input in sort of what I think important terms are going to be.
Yeah, Julie, you look like you're getting ready to say something.
I was waiting to see if you were, but you know, I think that's the next step, right? So right now what we have is the most basic stuff. What's the mineral? What's the grain size? And the next step is all of the other vocabulary, which we're going to start on tomorrow, as Randy says. But then that, you know, that's a great question. When we do that, that doesn't mean we can't back up and change the way the things we have right now work also. You know, some of those new terms will be worked into what's already present. So this is the kind of feedback I think that we're looking for this stage as well.
Yeah, and that's going to be, realistically, that's going to take a while, just sorting that stuff out, because the vocabulary is huge and how we interact with it is potentially kind of infinite. And Will, you're probably stuck contributing to that, whether you want to be or not at this point, honestly. So you'll have plenty of chance there.
No, okay, that's
the point.
That was sort of my question. Is I'm worried that you guys are getting way down the road, and if I contribute to something, I'm going to make the software back up, and I don't want to do that.
No.
I'm nervously jumping in now to make sure I don't cause problems later on. That's, I guess.
And just to clarify, like, so far, like, kind of discipline-specific vocabulary has not been implemented. So there is no deformation microstructures. There's no sedimentary vocabulary. There's no igneous vocabulary. There's no metamorphic vocabulary. And that's all coming. And so if you have strong opinions about where some of those should go, please give us feedback on those.
Just as a comment,
Uh-oh,
I lost Martin. Yeah.
Martin, you froze.
I think we might be temporarily cooked on Martin. Zach, you looked like you had something you wanted to mention.
hello?
Yeah.
Oh, we hear you now, Martin. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. So,
Okay.
Maybe this is a good opportunity to sort of simplify and harmonize some terminology, because there are some sort of notable discrepancies in that igneous and metamorphic petrologists call microstructures textures and glaciologists call them fabrics. So it's very confusing if you work across fields. So I mean, maybe it's hard to make one terminology that works for everybody, but at least it's good to have some translations as well.
Yep.
In
Totally
fact,
agree.
I was wondering, do we need any more terms than microstructure and crystallographic preferred orientation? Everything else is redundant. to be provocative.
A preferred orientation maybe, or other, there's.
Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Martin, and that effort is certainly going to keep going on, both internally at Strabo and between Strabo and EPOS. So it's got to happen. Zach, please go ahead. We keep getting bounced.
So I'm about to start working, running the SEM lab at the LaserCon facility in Arizona. And is there a way to set up from like an API standpoint or some way to integrate, images I'm taking with samples and things so that they're going directly into Strabo Spot Micro, so to speak, right off the bat? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so you're talking about like on the PetScope example would be like Strabo Micro is somehow like interfaced with your PetScope, and you just hit like capture image and bam, it just goes in.
Yeah, or even if it's just something that I can do at the end of the day, you know what I mean? But somehow integrate, like there's clearly a way to set up my whole instrument and all of that kind of metadata, but otherwise also just kind of push, things from a whole day of imaging or something to some kind of account that is capturing everything we did that day. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's certainly not currently. We've talked about that a lot. I think that even came up when you were in Madison last for one of the more recent workshops. The idea of like kind of, can we read sort of hardware instrument files, right? Like the SEMs typically spit out a text file, a TXT file with every image you take with scale and location and stuff like that. Can we eventually start to like parse that stuff and use it to bring into Strabo? All I can say about that is I would love it if we could eventually, but it's currently not clear to me, at least, how difficult that is or how far away it might be.
But I could maybe set up my own thing to take what I'm doing during a day and put it into something to shovel to Strabo, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, when there is like, I don't, Jason can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there can be an API really until there's like the kind of stuff sitting on the server thing. But I mean, the gold standard of Strabo stuff is always like, yeah, like hopefully people can write a thing that interacts with it in a cool way that we didn't do, and then like other people will riff off of that and do something cooler still. So I think ultimately, yeah, that should be totally doable.
Yeah, Zach. So right now, all the micro data is going to exist locally on the machine. We haven't tackled the sort of server side portion of micro yet. That's kind of the next step we're working on. But if you want to share with me some of your files that come from your machines with some images, I could take a peek and see kind of down the road what it might look like, if that would help.
yeah, that'll be great. It won't be until July or so, but basically there'll be a bunch of regular images with all the same sort of similar context and geometry, and so yeah, that might be good.
So all of the Strabo server side stuff has an API, a public facing API that anybody can use. So micro eventually will have that as well. So maybe I could get you pointed in the right direction to take advantage of that once it's in place. And you could,
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
I could maybe, like I said, help you wrap that data up in such a way that you could just, like you said, push it at the end of each day. That'd be really cool. That'd be a cool exercise. So
I think that'd be really great. And yeah, I think we could do some cool stuff with that maybe too. Yeah.
It would be, yeah. And I think, most SEMs, I think that image, the information necessary to just batch import things and have things show up on top of other images scaled appropriately is like, I think it's in theory, it's there. Like it's stored with the data files that the most modern SEMs collect. So.
And it seems like if it's part of the profile for a certain machine, then it can also sort of define the reference frame that you're using. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's a cool idea. I would personally, I mean, like the thing that we always tell people about Strabo, as Zach well knows, is like everybody in this room except for Jason is a geologist. Like, I mean, we want to see this work too. Like we want to use it too. And like, yeah, I would definitely use something like that. That would save a tremendous amount of time. Okay, people are starting to kind of trickle out, which is all good. But like I said, we're happy to stay. Any other questions? We're happy to answer them.
Yeah, I had a more. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So it was in relation to data repositories. So maybe this can carry on with a smaller group at another time. But in EPOS, we are interested.
Oh no. Atlantic is hello, Martin. Yeah, we got you. We lost you like at some point in there. I'm not sure where exactly.
Okay, so yeah, so we'd be interested in the possibility of hosting a data repository in Europe for Strabo Spot data, if that was an interesting thing to do. One question there, what resources would be needed to do that? So one issue comes up is sometimes about storing your data sort of nationally or within Europe if it's European funded. So there could be some advantages to doing that. And this year, at least in the Netherlands, we have a round of our national funding for infrastructures. So we do have an opportunity to try and include that in the next infrastructure application rounds.
I think that is very much a Doug question. That's my I could offer you an opinion about that, but Doug could offer you facts.
Let's let Jason start.
Well, let's see. So all of our back end has been containerized. So everything is running within Docker. So for us to provide you a copy of our back end to use, I won't say it's trivial, but it's definitely possible. We've talked about doing that with some other folks. So maybe that's something that we could look into a little more closely to see if that might be something that would work for you.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And for example, at this point, if you had a group of people working completely remotely, you would just set up a local instance of this container and you'd be all set to have a fully working data system. So it seems quite doable.
So we actually have people that have gone out into the field with no internet connection, and they've set up an instance of our back end on a laptop in the field, and they're able to push data to that. I think Doug's actually done this in the field, but you're able to push data to this sort of fake back end, as well as create tiled maps and that sort of thing. So it's definitely possible for us to give you a back end.
Those data become an endpoint that you can go address and pull things from.
If there was like a Strabo US or Strabo North America and like a Strabo Europe, like would search functionality inherently tap like both of those things? Like if I just went to Strabo and searched for fracture, like would I get European and North American data?
That's possible, but that would take a great deal of effort. So
okay, yeah, I think there's just logistics there to think about in terms of what's a good idea to do and what's not. Well, it is a good idea. What's a good idea to do and what's an accomplishable idea, I guess, is how we should phrase it.
Yeah. So from the data storage viewpoint, it's one aspect. It could be an advantage to have several different places, but as you say, for the search and analysis, then that could be a disadvantage. So
yeah, and we've talked about it before in terms of like this idea of like things being decentralized on some level, particularly when you start to talk about like, if you get thousands of users uploading like gigabits of data and that sort of thing, but there hasn't been any real concrete movement on that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I think that's one of those things we'll do when we have to do it.
Okay.
Zoom workshops are always so awkward at this phase, right? Like it's the one thing that doesn't port very well into the digital realm of doing workshops.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording, I think.
I think that's probably a reasonable thing to do. Yeah.